The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, smoked paprika, and the earthy sweetness of roasting sweet potatoes. 16-year-old Aaliyah Johnson leaned over the stove, carefully stirring a pot with a worn wooden spoon that once belonged to her grandmother. The walls of their modest Atlanta home were filled with warmth, not only from the heat of the oven, but from the rhythm of tradition. Her grandmother, Miss Evelyn, sat nearby in her rocking chair, smiling proudly as she watched her granddaughter move with a confidence that belied her age. "Don't rush the rice, baby," Evelyn reminded, her voice raspy but strong. "Good food takes patience. It's just like life. If you don't give it time, you'll miss the beauty of it." "Yes, Grandma," Aaliyah answered, adjusting the flame to a lower heat. She knew these lessons were about more than food. Her grandmother had raised her since her mother passed away, and every recipe came with a story. The dishes weren't just meals. They were history, survival, and love passed down through generations. On the counter beside her lay a spiral notebook with pages worn thin from constant use. Handwritten notes filled the margins, substitutions, improvements, dreams of dishes she had yet to perfect. She called it her recipe diary, though it felt more like a journal of her soul. Tonight she was working on something new, a fusion dish she had been imagining for weeks, blending the bold, fiery flavors of West African jollof rice with the creamy richness of Italian risotto. As the rice slowly absorbed the spiced broth, Aaliyah sprinkled in a handful of roasted sweet potato cubes, their caramelized edges melting into the dish. She inhaled deeply, savoring the aroma. "Sweet potato jollof risotto," she whispered to herself, the words tasting just as good as the food. Her grandmother chuckled. "That's a mouthful already. What made you think of that one?" Aaliyah smiled sheepishly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I wanted to create something that tells my story, something that feels like us. Southern comfort, African roots, but with a twist. Something nobody else has done before." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what the world needs, baby girl. Your own voice." Later that night, while packing away the leftovers, Aaliyah scrolled through her phone. An ad caught her eye. "Workshop with celebrity chef Roland Pierce. Discover the future of cuisine." Her heart skipped. Chef Roland was famous, the kind of chef whose name appeared in glossy magazines and on TV competitions. Attending his workshop could mean opportunity, exposure, maybe even a future in the culinary world. She clicked the link, her fingers trembling as she filled out the online form. They asked for her name, her age, and most importantly, a signature recipe. Without hesitation, she typed, "Sweet potato jollof risotto." Before hitting submit, she looked over at her grandmother, who was humming softly to herself, knitting by the window. "Grandma," she called quietly, "if I got the chance to show this dish to a real chef, do you think they'd take me seriously?" Her grandmother set down her knitting, met Aliyah's searching eyes, and smiled with a quiet strength that came from decades of resilience. "If they don't take you seriously, that's their mistake. You just make sure you take yourself seriously." With those words echoing in her ears, Aliyah pressed submit. She didn't know yet that the path ahead would test her confidence, bruise her pride, and eventually lead her far beyond what she imagined, all starting with the recipe she had created in this very kitchen. 2 weeks later, the acceptance email arrived. Aliyah nearly dropped her phone when she read the subject line. "Congratulations! You've been selected to attend Chef Roland Pierce's culinary workshop." She gasped so loudly that her grandmother looked up from her crossword puzzle, startled. "What is it, child?" Evelyn asked, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Aaliyah handed her the phone with shaking hands. Evelyn squinted at the screen, and then her face softened into a smile. "Lord have mercy. You did it." The workshop was being held in Atlanta's most prestigious culinary school, a sprawling glass building that seemed to shine with its own light. On the morning of the event, Aaliyah braided her hair neatly and tied on her favorite apron, the one with small embroidered sunflowers. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like her, authentic and unpretentious. Her grandmother insisted on driving her, humming gospel tunes the whole way. As they pulled up to the school, Aaliyah's excitement collided with nerves. Dozens of aspiring chefs stood outside, dressed in crisp white coats and polished shoes, their toolkits gleaming like surgical instruments. They were older, taller, and carried themselves with an air of entitlement that made Aliyah feel suddenly small. She tightened her grip on her worn canvas bag that held her ingredients, including the sweet potatoes she had carefully roasted at dawn. Inside, the workshop buzzed with anticipation. Stainless steel counters gleamed under the bright lights, rows of ovens lined the walls, and the air smelled faintly of truffles and garlic. A hush fell over the room as Chef Roland Pierce entered. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in his signature black chef's coat, he carried an aura of authority that silenced even the most confident participants. Cameras followed him, and assistants rushed to adjust his microphone. "Welcome," he announced, his voice smooth but commanding. "You're here because you believe you have something unique to bring to the culinary world. Today, I will be the judge of that." His words carried both promise and threat. Aliyah swallowed hard, trying to stand tall despite the knot in her stomach. She whispered to herself, "Take yourself seriously," repeating her grandmother's advice like a mantra. The participants were instructed to prepare their signature dish for Chef Roland's tasting. One by one, they set up their stations, unloading truffle oils, exotic spices, and designer knives. When it was Aliyah's turn, she unpacked her humble bag, sweet potatoes wrapped in foil, a jar of her grandmother's homemade spice blend, and a simple wooden spoon. A boy at the next station raised an eyebrow and smirked. "What is this? A home economics class?" he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Her cheeks burned, but she ignored him, focusing on her rice. She measured carefully, stirring with the slow patience her grandmother had taught her. As the dish came together, the kitchen filled with a fragrance unlike anything else in the room. Warm, earthy, and comforting, yet layered with bold spices that spoke of history and innovation. Even some of the skeptical participants glanced over, curiosity replacing their smirks. Finally, the moment arrived. Aliyah plated her sweet potato jollof risotto with trembling hands and set it before Chef Roland. The dish looked vibrant. Orange cubes of caramelized sweet potato nestled in creamy, saffron-tinted rice, topped with a drizzle of spiced oil and fresh herbs. Chef Roland leaned down, fork in hand. His expression was unreadable as he took a bite, chewed slowly, and then paused. The silence stretched on, so long that Aliyah's heart pounded in her ears. At last, he set down the fork and gave her a cool, dismissive smile. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "is peasant food dressed up as fine dining. It doesn't belong here." Laughter rippled through the workshop, and Aliyah's throat tightened. Her face felt hot, her chest hollow. She wanted to disappear into the floor. But deep inside, under the sting of humiliation, a spark flickered. His rejection hurt, but it didn't erase what she knew to be true. This dish mattered. As she gathered her things, she caught her grandmother's words echoing once again. "If they don't take you seriously, that's their mistake." That night, as the lights of the city blurred past the car window, Aliyah clenched her notebook to her chest and whispered, "This isn't the end. Not even close." The sting of Chef Roland's words lingered for days. Aliyah replayed the moment over and over in her head. The dismissive smile, the laughter of the other participants, the way her dish had been reduced to nothing more than peasant food. Each time her chest tightened, and she felt the weight of disappointment settle heavier on her shoulders. But life didn't pause for heartbreak. The following Monday, Aliyah was back in her high school kitchen classroom. The room was smaller, humbler, with mismatched pots and pans stacked on old metal shelves, but to her it felt like a sanctuary. Here, there were no camera crews, no prestigious chefs in gleaming uniforms, just the comforting clatter of utensils and the smell of herbs drying in jars. Her teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, noticed her quiet mood. "Aliyah," she said gently, leaning on the counter as students chopped vegetables, "you've been different lately. What's going on?" Aliyah hesitated. "I went to that workshop with Chef Roland Pierce." She tried to keep her voice steady. He hated my dish. Said it didn't belong." Mrs. Alvarez tilted her head, thoughtful. "And what do you think?" Aliyah blinked. No one had asked her that since it happened. She thought of the way her grandmother had closed her eyes when she first tasted the dish, savoring each bite like it carried memories of a whole generation. I think, she began slowly, I think it was good. Special, even. Just not to him. Mrs. Alvarez smiled, lines forming at the corners of her eyes. Exactly. His opinion isn't the world's opinion. And if your food tells your story, then it belongs everywhere. Those words lodged in Aaliyah's heart, feeding the small spark that hadn't gone out. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table at home, surrounded by the steady presence of her grandmother. Evelyn stirred a pot of collard greens on the stove, the smell filling the small apartment with comfort. Aaliyah spread her notebook open, flipping to the pages where she had scrawled recipe ideas. Grandma, she said, her voice firmer this time, what if we make the recipe even better? What if we take what we know and make it speak louder, so no one can ignore it? Evelyn turned, wooden spoon in hand, and studied her granddaughter's face. She saw not just determination, but fire. Child, our people been taking scraps and turning them into masterpieces for centuries. If you want to carry that forward, you'll have my blessing. Over the next week, Aaliyah worked tirelessly. She experimented with techniques she'd seen at the workshop. Slow reduction of broths, precision plating, pairing flavors with artistic intent. But she never abandoned the heart of the dish, the sweet potatoes and spices her grandmother had taught her to respect. One evening, after hours of trial and error, she set a plate in front of Evelyn. The risotto was creamy and golden, the sweet potatoes caramelized to perfection, topped with a garnish of crispy plantain chips for crunch and a drizzle of chili-infused honey. Evelyn took one bite and closed her eyes, then another. When she finally opened them, her face was wet with tears. This, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, this is not just food. This is a story on a plate. Our story. For the first time since the workshop, Aaliyah smiled without hesitation. The sting of rejection wasn't gone, but it no longer defined her. She was beginning to understand something bigger, that the true power of her cooking wasn't about impressing chefs like Roland Pierce. It was about honoring her roots and creating something that could move people, even to tears. Still, deep inside, another thought took root. If Chef Roland and the world didn't see her worth yet, she would find a way to show them. Loudly. The high school auditorium buzzed with the usual chatter of students and parents gathering for the annual community fundraiser. Long folding tables were lined up along the back wall, each covered with mismatched tablecloths and plates of homemade food. The event wasn't glamorous, no bright camera crews, no celebrity chefs, but to Aaliyah, it felt like the perfect stage to test herself again. She had signed up to bring a dish at the last minute, surprising even her teacher. Mrs. Alvarez had arched an eyebrow when she saw Aaliyah's name on the roster. This could be your chance, she had whispered with encouragement. Remember, cooking for your community is just as powerful as cooking for a critic. Backstage in the cramped school kitchen, Aaliyah moved with a focus she hadn't felt in weeks. The sound of sizzling butter in a skillet, the earthy sweetness of caramelizing sweet potatoes, the sharp sting of chopped chili peppers filling the air. It all fueled her determination. Her grandmother Evelyn had insisted on coming too, standing nearby with her cane and offering quiet words of advice. Take your time, Evelyn said, watching her granddaughter stir the risotto slowly, lovingly. Patience is flavor. Don't rush it. Aaliyah nodded, remembering Roland Pierce's cold laughter at the workshop, and for a moment doubt threatened to creep in. But she quickly pushed it aside. Tonight she wasn't cooking for him. She was cooking for her people, for her grandmother, for herself. By the time she carried her tray to the table, the room was packed. Parents scooped spoonfuls of macaroni and cheese, kids stacked cupcakes onto paper plates, and the principal walked around shaking hands. Aaliyah set her dish down, its golden hue catching the soft light of the auditorium. Steam curled upward, carrying the scents of spices and honey that turned a few heads immediately. Sweet potato risotto? One man asked curiously as she offered him a serving. Yes, she replied, forcing herself to speak with confidence. It's inspired by my grandmother's recipe, with a twist. He took a bite and his eyes widened. This is incredible. His voice carried, drawing attention. Soon, a small line began to form at her table. Students, parents, even teachers leaned in to try what she had made. A hush would fall each time someone took their first bite, followed by murmurs of surprise, then praise. Mrs. Alvarez made her way over, a plate in hand. She took one forkful, her expression unreadable at first. Then, her face broke into a radiant smile. "Aaliyah," she said warmly, "this dish belongs on more than just a school table. This dish belongs on the world stage." The words filled Aaliyah with a heat that spread through her chest. But before she could reply, she noticed someone standing a little apart from the crowd. It was a woman she didn't recognize at first. Tall, sharply dressed, with a notepad in hand. She wasn't a parent or teacher, that much was clear. The woman stepped closer, sampling the dish quietly, then scribbling something in her notes. After a pause, she extended a card to Aaliyah. "I'm Linda Foster," she said smoothly. "I scout for young talent for the Junior International Culinary Competition. We're always looking for new voices, new stories told through food. You should apply." Aaliyah froze, the card trembling in her hand. The International Culinary Competition was the kind of event she had only ever read about in magazines, a stage where the best young chefs from all over the world came together. She glanced at her grandmother, whose proud smile seemed to say, "This is the moment we've been waiting for." The room around her faded into background noise. All she could think of was the smirk on Chef Roland's face when he had dismissed her dish, the sting of humiliation that had followed. And now here she was, standing on the edge of something bigger than she had ever dared dream. "Thank you," she said quietly but firmly, meeting Linda's gaze. "I'll apply." And in that instant, Aaliyah knew. Her journey wasn't just about proving Roland Pierce wrong anymore. It was about stepping fully into the chef she was meant to be, one recipe, one stage, one story at a time. The weeks that followed the fundraiser felt like a whirlwind for Aaliyah. She had accepted Linda Foster's invitation to apply for the Junior International Culinary Competition, and to her disbelief, she was chosen as one of the finalists. The acceptance email had arrived late at night, glowing on her cracked phone screen while she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her grandmother, Evelyn, upon hearing the news, clapped her hands together with tears in her eyes. "See, baby, I told you. God gave you a gift, and now the world will finally see it." But as the reality set in, so did the pressure. The competition was in New York City, an entirely different world compared to her small-town life. The moment she received the official packet, listing the expectations, schedules, and the names of other competitors, many of them from elite culinary academies, her chest tightened with both fear and determination. Most of her days now revolved around practice. The kitchen in their modest home became her training ground. Evelyn would sit at the small wooden table, notebook in hand, watching her granddaughter experiment. Aaliyah would try variation after variation of her sweet potato risotto, sometimes changing just a single spice, sometimes reconstructing it entirely into new dishes that highlighted her heritage. Collard greens turned into delicate roulades, cornbread broken down and reimagined as savory soufflés, catfish paired with citrus glazes. Still, the doubts crept in late at night. She'd scroll through the social media accounts of her competitors, pictures of them cooking in state-of-the-art kitchens, guided by celebrity mentors, plated dishes that looked like art. "What chance do I have?" she thought more than once, her stomach twisting. One evening, after a particularly disastrous attempt at a smoked pepper sauce, she sank into a chair, head in her hands. Evelyn hobbled over with her cane, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Child," Evelyn said, her voice steady, "you're not here to compete against their money or their shiny kitchens. You're here to compete with your heart. And your heart, your story, is something they can't buy." Her words landed like a spark inside Aaliyah, reigniting her drive. She began keeping a journal, scribbling ideas not only about recipes, but about the why behind them. Each dish wasn't just food, it was memory, history, identity. Her grandmother's sweet potatoes from Sunday dinners, her mother's gumbo that stretched through hard times, the church potlucks where every dish was a declaration of love and survival. As the competition drew closer, she received a small package in the mail. It was from Linda Foster. Inside was a handwritten note. "The judges don't just want technique. They want a story. Let them taste who you are." Aaliyah tucked the note into her journal, carrying it with her every day, like a secret talisman. The night before they were set to travel, she stood in the kitchen one last time, practicing her final plating. The dish glowed under the dim light bulb. Sweet potato risotto, garnished with crispy sage, drizzled with a subtle honey reduction, surrounded by tiny bursts of pickled peppers for heat and brightness. She stared at it for a long moment, realizing it wasn't just food anymore. It was her journey on a plate. When she looked up, Evelyn was watching her with a proud, almost fierce expression. "Pack your bags, baby," she said softly. "New York ain't ready for you." Aaliyah smiled, her nerves melting into determination. Tomorrow, the world would see her not as the girl chef Roland had laughed at, but as the chef she was becoming. The air inside the grand hall of the International Culinary Competition was electric, alive with the sounds of clanging pans, the hum of industrial ovens, and the murmur of an audience that filled every seat. Bright spotlights reflected off polished counters, illuminating rows of contestants in pristine white jackets embroidered with their names. To Aaliyah, it felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping into the heart of a storm where everything mattered. She stood at her assigned station, her grandmother Evelyn's words echoing in her mind, "They can't buy your heart." Around her, the other competitors moved with practiced confidence. One boy from Paris delicately filleted fish, as though he had done it 1,000 times in a Michelin kitchen. A girl from Tokyo arranged ingredients in perfect order, every motion precise, her knives glinting under the lights. Aaliyah glanced at her own station, a simple spread of familiar vegetables, grains, and spices that she had carried in her suitcase from home. For a fleeting moment, doubt threatened to overwhelm her. The announcer's voice boomed across the hall. "Chefs, you have 2 hours. Create a dish that tells a story." With a deep breath, Aaliyah tied her apron tighter and began. Her hands shook at first, but soon her rhythm found her. She peeled and cubed the sweet potatoes, their orange flesh vivid under the bright lights. She roasted them until caramelized, letting the natural sugars deepen into a rich aroma. She simmered the arborio rice slowly, coaxing it into creamy submission, whispering the same prayers her grandmother always hummed over Sunday meals. Every few minutes, she caught sight of the judges walking past. Stern, unreadable faces, their clipboards ready. Among them was none other than Chef Roland, his silver hair gleaming, his sharp eyes darting toward her station. A smirk curved at his lips, as though he still couldn't quite believe she belonged here. Sweat prickled down her back, but she kept moving, stirring, tasting, adjusting. She added the roasted sweet potato puree to the risotto, folding in notes of nutmeg and cinnamon, a daring move in such a refined competition. Around her, the other contestants relied on luxury ingredients, truffles shaved into delicate curls, lobster tails poached in champagne, foie gras seared to perfection. She heard whispers in the audience. "What is she making? Sweet potatoes? That's so simple." Her heart thudded, but she pushed on. Simple wasn't a weakness. It was her strength. As the clock ticked down to its final 30 minutes, the atmosphere grew tense. One contestant accidentally burned a sauce, sending a bitter cloud into the air. Another cut his finger, blood staining his immaculate station, until a medic rushed over. Aaliyah blocked it all out, her focus narrowing to the dish in front of her. She garnished her risotto with crispy sage leaves fried to delicate emerald chips, arranged slivers of pickled peppers in a circle like tiny jewels, and drizzled honey reduction in precise golden ribbons. When she finally stepped back, her dish looked like home transformed into art, a story on a plate. Her chest tightened with pride and fear. "Time!" the announcer shouted. The room erupted with sighs of relief, clattering pans, and nervous glances. Contestants lined up, presenting their creations one by one to the judges seated at a long table. Aaliyah's turn came near the end, her dish balanced carefully in her hands. As she approached, the room seemed to quiet. She set the plate down before the judges, her voice trembling but steady enough. "This dish," she began, "is sweet potato risotto, with honey reduction, crispy sage, and pickled peppers. It's inspired by my grandmother's cooking and by the resilience of my community. It's about taking what we have, making it enough, and turning it into something beautiful. The judges leaned in, inspecting. One lifted a fork, scooping a bite, then another followed. Their faces were unreadable, thoughtful, serious, each tasting in silence. Finally, Chef Roland took his turn, slowly raising a forkful to his mouth. For a moment, everything inside Aliyah froze. Then, as Roland chewed, his smirk faltered, his brows lifting ever so slightly in surprise. He glanced at the dish again, as though he couldn't believe what he had just tasted. The other judges exchanged murmurs, scribbling on their scorecards. Aliyah stood there with her heart pounding in her ears, hands clasped tightly in front of her, waiting. The competition wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she felt she had truly made them listen. The hall buzzed with anticipation as the judges finished their final notes, their pens scratching in silence. Contestants stood in a tense line on stage, the bright lights heating their faces, while the audience leaned forward in their seats, whispering predictions. Aliyah clasped her hands together so tightly, her knuckles turned pale. Her dish had been tasted, her story told, and now all that remained was the verdict. The announcer's voice echoed across the room. We now present the top 3 dishes of this year's International Culinary Competition. A drumroll hummed through the speakers. The announcer read the names of 2 contestants first. The young woman from Tokyo, with her perfectly balanced fish course, and the Parisian prodigy, with his elegant lobster creation. Applause filled the hall as they stepped forward. Aliyah's heart sank. For a split second, she thought her name wouldn't be called, that maybe she had dreamed too big. Then, the announcer's voice rang out, and our 3rd finalist, Aliyah Johnson, with her sweet potato risotto. The hall erupted in a mix of cheers and surprised gasps. Aliyah's breath caught as she stepped forward, her knees trembling. She glanced toward the audience and saw her grandmother Evelyn beaming through tears, her hands pressed against her chest. That look alone made every moment worth it. The finalists stood shoulder to shoulder, while the head judge rose to his feet. He spoke into the microphone, his tone solemn. Each of these dishes represents a story, a culture, and a vision. Tonight, we award the highest honor to the chef whose dish not only dazzled our palates, but also moved us deeply with its soul. A hush fell over the crowd. The head judge opened the envelope slowly, dramatically. The winner of this year's International Culinary Competition is Aliyah Johnson. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent. Then, it exploded into thunderous applause and cheers. Cameras flashed, capturing Aliyah's stunned expression as tears filled her eyes. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, unable to believe what she had just heard. Chef Roland, seated among the judges, froze in place. His smirk was gone, replaced by something he had never shown her before. Respect, mixed with disbelief. He clapped stiffly, his face pale, as though the reality of his mistake crushed him from the inside out. This was the girl he had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated. And now, in front of the entire world, she had triumphed. The head judge handed Aliyah the golden trophy, its surface gleaming under the lights. Her name was etched onto it for eternity. She held it close, her arms trembling from both its weight and the overwhelming rush of emotions. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Her grandmother Evelyn made her way to the stage, and when Aliyah saw her, she couldn't hold back anymore. She rushed forward and threw her arms around her grandmother, sobbing into her shoulder. Evelyn whispered softly in her ear, I told you, baby. They can't buy your heart. And tonight, your heart won. As reporters swarmed the stage, cameras rolling, Aliyah finally found her voice. Holding the trophy, she looked out over the crowd. This dish was more than food, she said, her voice strong despite the tears. It was a piece of my family, my community, and my story. Tonight proves that no matter who doubts you, your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. The hall erupted again in cheers. In the front row, Chef Roland lowered his gaze, humiliated. The memory of his words, "You don't belong here," echoed back at him, now shattered by the truth standing on the stage. Aliyah stood taller, her trophy gleaming in the spotlight. She wasn't just a contestant anymore. She was a champion. a voice for those who had been silenced, and a reminder that resilience could transform pain into triumph. The competition stage that once felt intimidating was now hers, and the world was finally watching.